Welcome to Silent Conduit. This channel explores the hidden, lesser-known corners of the internet, what we refer to as the dark web. All content here is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We do not endorse or encourage any illegal activities, and viewers should exercise caution if exploring these topics independently. Stay safe, stay informed, and let's dive in. Also, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Use headphones for better experience.
I wasn't always this person, paranoid, broken, glancing over my shoulder at every turn. There was a time when the world felt enormous, full of possibilities. Growing up in a small town with parents who were pillars of the community, I had every reason to feel safe. My father, a respected doctor, and my mother, an attorney known for defending those who couldn't afford justice, were the embodiment of morality, or so I believed. In high school, I was restless, consumed by a curiosity that couldn't be sated by textbooks or weekend football games. I wanted more than my quiet town could offer, more than the expectations placed on me. My friends would call me Jack the Wanderer because I'd always be the first to suggest sneaking out to explore the abandoned factory on the edge of town or hiking to places we weren't supposed to go. It was in those moments, standing in the ruins of forgotten places or watching the sunrise from a hidden cliff, that I felt alive. And then there was Sarah, my high school sweetheart. She was the kind of girl who made everything seem possible, who laughed at my wild dreams but supported them anyway. I thought she was it for me. Until the day she wasn't. The breakup came swift and brutal, leaving me hollow. I found solace in my friends and in planning for college, anything to escape the memories of us. College was supposed to be my fresh start, and in many ways, it was. I threw myself into classes, fueled by an insatiable desire to understand the world. Philosophy, computer science, art, history, I devoured it all. I made new friends, the kind who didn't know about Sarah or the small-town kid I used to be. There was Matt, who shared my love for late-night debates over coffee, and Lisa, who dragged me to every gallery opening she could find. For a while, I thought I had found myself. But college also brought questions I hadn't anticipated. Nights spent talking with Matt blurred into something more intimate, and I found myself questioning things I had always taken for granted. Was I attracted to men? To women? Both? The answers didn't come easily, and for a time, I experimented, trying to understand who I was. That's when I met Rachel. She wasn't like anyone I'd known before, sharp-witted, fiercely independent, and unapologetically herself. She didn't care about my doubts or the baggage I carried. With her, love felt like coming home, like I didn't have to figure everything out all at once. But my curiosity never faded. Rachel used to tease me about it, calling me a human rabbit hole, because I couldn't let go of a mystery once it caught my attention. It was during one of those late-night YouTube binges, the kind where you go from watching cooking videos to conspiracy theories in the span of an hour, that I first heard about the dark web. It was Matt who introduced me to it for real. "It's not what you think," he had said over beers one night. "It's not just hitmen and drug markets. There's interesting stuff there. Weird stuff." I wasn't convinced, but my curiosity got the better of me. Matt showed me how to download Tor, how to use Bitcoin, and how to navigate the hidden layers of the internet. At first, it was harmless, forums for conspiracy theories, obscure books, and bizarre art. Rachel thought it was stupid, a waste of time, but to me, it was fascinating. "You're going to get yourself into trouble," she warned, one night as I sat at my laptop, scrolling through yet another page of strange, encrypted content. "Relax," I told her, grinning. "It's just a bunch of nerds and paranoids." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The night Alex texted me, frantic, desperate, it felt like the end of that chapter of my life. I didn't know it yet, but everything I thought I understood about myself, my family, and the world was about to unravel. As I stood in Alex's room that morning, staring at his computer, I realized that my curiosity, my insatiable need to know, had brought me to the edge of something dark and unthinkable. The dark web wasn't just a mystery to solve. It was a trap, and I had walked straight into it. The day Alex disappeared marked the first crack in my carefully constructed world. It wasn't just the fear of losing my best friend, it was the gnawing suspicion that I had played some part in whatever happened to him. The memory of his frantic texts replayed in my head as I pedaled toward his house that morning, my mind clouded with dread. By the time I reached his street, the flashing lights of police cars and the wails of his mother made my stomach turn. I lingered at the edge of the crowd, trying to piece together the chaos unfolding in front of me. The neighbors whispered in hushed tones, their curiosity thinly veiling their concern. Alex's house, usually so full of life with his little sister playing in the yard or his dog barking at passers-by, now felt like the epicenter of something sinister. Jack. Mrs. Carter, Alex's mom, spotted me and hurried over. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling. "Have you seen him? Please, tell me you've seen him." Her desperation was palpable, and I felt a pang of guilt. I should have called him back. I should have answered his texts. But all I could manage was a weak, "No, I haven't." "I'm sorry." The detectives weren't much help. They asked the usual questions. When I last saw Alex, if he seemed upset or worried, but I didn't have the answers they needed. The truth was, Alex had been acting strange for weeks. He was distant, distracted, spending more time on his computer than with me or anyone else. I chalked it up to stress. He'd always been intense about his projects, but now I wasn't so sure. When the detectives finally let me go, I couldn't shake the feeling that Alex's room held the key to his disappearance. I lingered until the crowd thinned, then slipped past the front door and up the stairs. The sight of his room stopped me cold. It was a mess, papers scattered across the desk, a chair knocked over, drawers half open as if someone had been searching for something. But what drew my attention most was his computer, still on, the monitor glowing faintly in the dim light. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the mouse. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let the police handle it. But another part of me, the part that had spent years chasing mysteries and exploring forbidden places, refused to leave without answers. The screen came to life, revealing a maze of open tabs, each more unsettling than the last. There were forums discussing everything from human trafficking to illegal auctions. Cryptic messages in code filled the chat boxes, their meanings just out of reach. My pulse quickened as I clicked through the tabs, each one a window into a darker world. And then I saw it. A thread titled "Loose Ends." The post was short, almost cryptic. "The Carter kid knows too much. Tying it up tonight." My breath caught in my throat. Was this about Alex? Who were they talking to? Before I could think, I clicked on the username of the person who had written the post. It took me to a profile filled with links to other threads, most of them discussing cleanup jobs and containment. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't just an abstract conversation, these were plans, meticulously detailed and horrifyingly real. One link caught my eye, recent operations. I hesitated before clicking, my hand trembling. The page loaded slowly, the spinning icon on the screen taunting me with its delay. When it finally appeared, my blood ran cold. It was a list of names, dates, and locations. Most of the names meant nothing to me, but one jumped out like a slap to the face: Jack Porter. My name. My vision blurred as I stared at the screen. My name was on their list. But why? I scrolled frantically, trying to make sense of it. There were notes next to each name, details about their habits, their connections. Next to mine, it read, family ties. High risk. I nearly fell out of the chair. Family ties. What the hell did that mean? My parents were upstanding citizens, respected in the community. They couldn't possibly have anything to do with this. Could they? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Alex had been diving deep into the dark web for weeks. He must have stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see, something that involved my family. But what? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I grabbed Alex's external hard drive from his desk and stuffed it into my backpack. If the dark web was the key to understanding what happened to Alex and why my name was on that list, I would find the answers, no matter the cost. The ride home was a blur. My phone buzzed with messages from Rachel and Matt, asking if I was okay, if I'd heard anything. I ignored them. My mind was too consumed by the images I'd seen, the questions swirling in my head. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. My parents were out, probably at some charity event or community meeting. For the first time, their absence felt more like an opportunity than a comfort. I locked myself in my room and hooked up Alex's hard drive to my laptop. The files were encrypted, of course, but Alex had taught me a few tricks over the years. It took hours of trial and error, but eventually, I cracked the first layer of security. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. There were videos, hundreds of them, each one a recording of something unspeakable. People being tortured, killed, their screams echoing in the dimly lit basements where they were held. I forced myself to watch, searching for anything that might explain Alex's disappearance. And then I saw it. A video dated 2 nights ago. The camera panned across a familiar room, Alex's bedroom. He was sitting at his desk, typing furiously, his face pale and tense. Behind him, the door creaked open. 2 figures stepped into the frame, their faces obscured by masks. Alex turned, his eyes widening in terror. He tried to run, but they grabbed him, dragging him out of the room as he screamed for help. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen in stunned silence. Alex had been taken. And whoever took him was watching. As I sat there, paralyzed by fear, a new message popped up on the screen. Stop digging, Jack. Loose ends are dangerous. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick with dread. They knew I was watching. They knew I had the hard drive. And they weren't going to let me walk away. When I saw the message, stop digging, Jack. Loose ends are dangerous, I felt the walls closing in. The words weren't just a warning, they were a declaration. Whoever had taken Alex, whoever had dragged me into this nightmare, knew I was watching. They had been watching me too. My first instinct was to turn off the computer, to erase every trace of what I had seen, but it was too late. If they knew I had accessed Alex's files, they'd already found me. My room, once a safe haven, felt suffocating. Every creak in the house, every faint noise outside, sent waves of paranoia coursing through me. I couldn't think straight. My thoughts spiraled, looping back to the same terrifying question, why me? The videos on Alex's hard drive haunted me. The screams, the faces, the horrific acts, none of it made sense. My parents, always so kind and composed, seemed a million miles removed from the kind of violence I had witnessed. But the threads were all pointing in one direction, and I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in my head, whispering that my perfect family might not be so perfect after all. I needed to clear my head. Grabbing my phone and jacket, I stepped outside into the cold night air. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you feel like something was lurking just beyond the shadows. The park down the street had always been my go-to place to think. I sat on the swings, staring at the empty playground as the events of the past few days replayed in my mind. Alex's disappearance, the dark web threads, the videos, the message, it all felt like a twisted puzzle with pieces scattered in every direction. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from Rachel, "Jack, I'm worried about you. Call me." I stared at the screen, torn. Rachel was the one person I trusted more than anyone, but how could I possibly explain this to her? How could I tell her that my best friend was missing, that my family might be involved in something horrifying, that my name was on some shadowy list? Before I could decide, another text came through. This one wasn't from Rachel. It wasn't from anyone I recognized. "You're not safe. Stop looking. Go home." My blood ran cold. I looked around the park, my heart pounding. Was someone watching me? My eyes scanned the darkened street, the empty benches, the line of trees at the edge of the playground. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I sprinted home, my mind racing. Whoever had sent that message knew where I was, which meant they could find me wherever I went. There was no escape, no running from this. The only way out was to keep digging, to find out what Alex had uncovered and why it had put a target on his back, and mine. Back in my room, I locked the door and sat down at my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Alex's files were a labyrinth of encrypted folders, each one requiring a new password. It was slow, painstaking work, but with every folder I unlocked, the bigger picture began to take shape. There were financial records, transactions made with Bitcoin, untraceable but extensive. Payments for services rendered, with cryptic descriptions like cleaning and containment. I recognized some of the names from the dark web threads, including the one who had posted about Alex being a loose end. Then there were the addresses. Dozens of them, scattered across the country. Most meant nothing to me, but one stopped me cold. It was my childhood home. The one we had left so abruptly after our neighbor's death. My heart pounded as memories flooded back. Police tape across her yard, whispered rumors about how the case had never been solved. My parents had told me it was just a tragic accident, a break-in gone wrong. But now, I wasn't so sure. I found a folder labeled Porter Family, buried deep within Alex's files. Opening it felt like crossing a line I could never come back from. Inside were documents, scans of old police reports, news clippings about unsolved murders, and photos. The photos were the worst. They showed my parents, standing in dimly lit basements, their faces calm and emotionless. In one, my father held a knife, his shirt splattered with blood. In another, my mother stood over a body, her hands gloved and steady. I couldn't breathe. The people in those photos weren't the parents I knew. They were strangers, monsters wearing the faces of the people who had raised me. I stared at the screen, paralyzed by fear and disbelief, until another message popped up. "It's not what you think, Jack. Let it go." This time, I didn't run. I typed back, my fingers shaking, "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly, you're asking the wrong questions. The real question is, how far are you willing to go for the truth? The screen went black. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark monitor, the words echoing in my mind. How far was I willing to go? The answer came to me slowly, like a knot tightening in my chest. As much as I wanted to turn back, to pretend none of this was real, I couldn't. Not after what I had seen. Not with Alex still missing. I spent the rest of the night poring over Alex's files, piecing together what I could. The addresses, the transactions, the cryptic messages, they all pointed to something much bigger than I had imagined. This wasn't just about my parents. It wasn't even just about Alex. It was a network, sprawling and insidious, with roots that stretched far deeper than I could comprehend. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. It was reckless and dangerous, but it was the only way I could see this through. I was going to one of the addresses on the list. The morning light felt cold, indifferent. I watched it creep through the blinds, cutting across my desk where Alex's hard drive still sat. My room, once a sanctuary of books and half-finished projects, now felt like a prison cell, trapping me with the weight of everything I'd discovered. My parents were still out. Their absence was a strange relief. No forced smiles, no small talk, just silence. It gave me space to think, but it also left me vulnerable. Every sound in the house set me on edge, every creak in the floorboards felt like a threat. I packed a bag, stuffing it with essentials, a flashlight, my phone charger, a pocket knife I had bought on a whim years ago but never thought I'd need. The address from Alex's files burned in my mind. It was about an hour's drive away, a rural property on the outskirts of town. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't just sit here waiting for the darkness to swallow me whole. Before I left, I texted Rachel. I need to talk to you. Something's wrong. I'll explain later. Her reply came quickly, where are you? Are you okay? I hesitated, then typed back, I'm fine. I need to figure some things out. I'll call you tonight. It was a lie, of course. I wasn't fine, and I didn't know if I'd make it to tonight. But I couldn't drag her into this. Not yet. The drive to the address felt longer than it was. The closer I got, the more the landscape seemed to change. The city streets gave way to winding roads flanked by dense woods, the kind that seemed to stretch forever. The air felt heavier out here, the kind of silence that made you question if you were ever really alone. When I finally reached the property, my heart sank. It was a farmhouse, or at least it used to be. The building was dilapidated, its windows boarded up, the paint peeling like dead skin. The barn behind it loomed like a shadow, its doors hanging slightly ajar. I parked down the road, not daring to pull into the driveway. Grabbing my bag, I made my way through the overgrown grass, every step feeling like a decision I couldn't take back. The front door of the house was locked, but the barn wasn't. The smell hit me first, a mix of mildew, rust, and something else, something faintly metallic. Blood? I couldn't be sure. Inside, the barn was a labyrinth of broken equipment and stacked crates. Dust danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. I stepped carefully, my flashlight cutting through the dimness as I searched for. I didn't even know what. At first, it seemed like there was nothing to find. Just a forgotten barn in the middle of nowhere. But then I noticed the trapdoor. It was hidden beneath a tarp and a pile of old tires, the kind of thing you wouldn't see unless you were looking for it. My hands trembled as I cleared the debris, revealing a heavy metal latch. I hesitated. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever was down there, it was something Alex had found, something dangerous enough to get him taken. With a deep breath, I pulled the latch. The trapdoor groaned as it opened, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was damp and cold, carrying with it the faint hum of electricity. I stepped down cautiously, the flashlight beam shaking as I descended. The stairs led to a small concrete room, no bigger than a garage. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange, unmarked equipment, computers, hard drives, and what looked like medical supplies. But it was the chair in the center of the room that made my blood run cold. It was bolted to the floor, its metal frame stained with something dark and crusted. Shackles hung from the armrests and legs, their purpose horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a storage room. It was a place where people were kept. My stomach turned as I noticed the camera mounted in the corner, its lens pointed directly at the chair. It was still on, a faint red light blinking ominously. I moved closer, my heart pounding as I inspected the equipment. One of the monitors flickered to life as I approached, displaying a live feed of the barn. Someone was outside. I froze, my mind racing. The figure on the screen was tall, dressed in black, their face obscured by a hood. They moved methodically, checking the perimeter of the barn before heading toward the house. I turned off the monitor, my breath shallow and quick. Whoever they were, they didn't know I was here, yet. But it was only a matter of time. I scanned the room for anything useful, my eyes landing on a stack of papers on the far wall. They were records, lists of names, dates, and locations, much like the files on Alex's hard drive. But these were handwritten, their margins filled with cryptic notes. One name stood out immediately, Alexander Carter. Next to it, a single word, secured. My blood ran cold. Secured? Did that mean Alex was alive? Or was it just a euphemism for something far worse? I stuffed the papers into my bag, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here before the person outside decided to check the barn. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a photograph pinned to the wall. It was of my parents. They were younger, smiling, standing in front of a different house. But it wasn't the photo itself that terrified me. It was the note scrawled across the bottom, "Trust is a fragile thing. Don't shatter it, Jack." I didn't have time to process it. The sound of footsteps echoed above me, the trapdoor creaking open. Someone was coming. The creak of the trapdoor above froze me in place. I flattened myself against the cold concrete wall, every muscle in my body tensed. My breathing was shallow, and my pulse pounded in my ears as boots thudded against the metal stairs. The figure descended slowly, deliberately, as if they knew I was there and wanted me to hear every step. The beam of a flashlight swept across the room, casting sharp, dancing shadows. I clenched the pocket knife in my hand, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. "Jack," a voice called out, low and calm. A voice I didn't recognize. "Come on now. No need to make this harder than it has to be." The figure's silhouette emerged from the stairs, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black hoodie and gloves. They didn't look surprised to find the room disturbed. In fact, they seemed to be expecting it. I stayed silent, trying to make myself invisible in the dim corner of the room. The flashlight moved again, sweeping across the chair in the center, then the shelves. "I know you're here," the voice said, almost sing-song. "You've been busy, haven't you? Digging where you shouldn't. But this is the end of the road." The figure took another step forward, and my heart sank as the beam landed on the stack of papers I'd left disturbed. They noticed immediately, crouching down to inspect the disarray. I made my move. Bursting from my corner, I bolted toward the stairs, the adrenaline drowning out any second guessing. The figure shouted, but I didn't look back. My only thought was escape. I was halfway up the stairs when a hand grabbed the back of my jacket, yanking me off balance. I tumbled backward, hitting the hard concrete floor with a sickening thud. Pain exploded through my shoulder and head, but I forced myself to scramble to my feet. "Not so fast," the figure growled, closing the distance between us. I swung the pocket knife wildly, the blade catching the edge of their sleeve. It was enough to make them hesitate, but not enough to stop them. They lunged, pinning me against the wall with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. "Feisty, aren't you?" they sneered, wrenching the knife from my hand and tossing it across the room. I struggled, kicking and twisting, but they were stronger, their grip unrelenting. My mind raced, searching for anything I could use to turn the tide. My eyes darted to the shelves, cluttered with equipment and tools. With one desperate motion, I reached out, grabbing a heavy metal wrench and swinging it with all my strength. It connected with their shoulder, and they let out a grunt of pain, their grip loosening just enough for me to slip free. I didn't waste a second. Grabbing the papers from the floor, I sprinted up the stairs, ignoring the sharp ache in my ribs. The figure was close behind, their footsteps thunderous as they chased me into the barn above. The daylight was blinding as I burst outside, the open air a stark contrast to the suffocating confines of the basement. I ran toward the woods, my legs burning with every step. Branches whipped against my face and arms, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I could hear the figure shouting into a radio. "Targets on foot. Heading into the woods. Don't let him get away." They weren't alone. Panic surged through me as I realized I wasn't just running from one person, I was being hunted. The woods seemed endless, the trees a blur as I pushed myself harder, faster. My lungs burned, and my vision swam, but the sound of pursuit kept me going that I stumbled into a clearing, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. For a moment, the silence was deafening. No footsteps, no shouting. Just the rustling of leaves and my own ragged breaths. I ducked behind a fallen tree, trying to catch my breath and think. The papers in my bag felt like a lead weight. They were my only leverage, my only proof of whatever dark web conspiracy I'd uncovered. I knew I couldn't run forever. If they caught me again, I might not get another chance to escape. I needed a plan. The faint crunch of leaves brought me back to reality. They were close, too close. I scanned the clearing, my eyes landing on a jagged rock near my hiding spot. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Gripping the rock tightly, I waited, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure emerged from the trees, their hood still up, their flashlights scanning the area. "Jack," they called out, their tone mocking. "This is getting tiresome. You can't hide forever." I stayed still, waiting for the right moment. As they passed my hiding spot, I sprang forward, swinging the rock with everything I had. It hit their head with a sickening crack, and they stumbled, cursing. I didn't stick around to see if they went down. I ran again, weaving through the trees, the blood roaring in my ears. This time, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, but eventually, I saw a break in the trees. A road. I stumbled onto the asphalt, barely able to stand. A car was approaching in the distance, its headlights cutting through the dusk. I waved my arms frantically, praying they would stop. The car slowed, pulling to a stop a few feet away. The driver, a middle-aged man with a concerned expression, rolled down the window. "Are you okay? What happened?" I need help," I gasped, barely able to get the words out. "Please. Just get me out of here." He hesitated, clearly unsure of what to make of me, but then he unlocked the doors. "Get in," he said. As I climbed into the passenger seat, I glanced back toward the woods. The figure stood at the edge of the trees, watching me. Their hood was down now, revealing a face I recognized all too well. It was my mother. The realization struck me like a blow to the chest. It was her. My mother. Standing at the edge of the woods, her face partially obscured by the fading light, but her eyes unmistakable. She didn't move, didn't shout, she simply watched as the car sped away, her expression cold and calculating, as if she was already planning her next move. My breath came in shallow gasps as the car rattled down the narrow country road. The man driving glanced at me every so often, his expression a mixture of concern and suspicion. "You okay, kid?" he asked finally, his voice breaking the tense silence. I struggled to form a coherent response. I just need to get somewhere safe." He frowned, clearly wanting more of an explanation, but he didn't press. "I'll take you to the nearest town. There's a diner off the highway. You can call someone from there." I nodded, clutching the straps of my bag as if it were the only thing anchoring me to reality. The papers inside felt heavier now, their significance growing with every passing second. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, what Alex had uncovered and what my parents were involved in. The diner was a relic of the past, a chrome neon beacon in the middle of nowhere. The smell of frying grease hit me as soon as I stepped inside, a strange comfort amidst the chaos of the day. I thanked the driver and slipped him a few crumpled bills before heading to a corner booth, where I could keep my back to the wall and watch the entrance. I pulled out the stack of papers, spreading them across the table. My hands trembled as I sifted through them, my eyes scanning the names and locations. Many of them were unfamiliar, but others leaped out at me, local landmarks, addresses in towns I knew, people I'd seen in passing. The connections were overwhelming. One page caught my attention. It was a map, hand-drawn and marked with red X's. At first glance, it seemed random, but as I traced the locations, a horrifying pattern emerged. Each X corresponded to a disappearance, a murder, or an unexplained event. And one of the X's was my family's house. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a coordinated network, a system of control and fear stretching far beyond anything I'd imagined. I flipped through more pages, each one more chilling than the last. There were photographs, grainy, low-resolution images that appeared to have been taken from security cameras. They showed people I didn't recognize, their faces twisted in fear as they were dragged into dark vans or pushed into basements. And then there was Alex. The photograph of him was different, sharper, as if taken recently. He was seated in the same chair I'd seen in the basement, his face bruised, his eyes distant. Scrawled beneath the image were the words, "Awaiting transfer." My throat tightened. He was alive. Somehow, against all odds, Alex was still alive. But the implications were staggering. Transfer? To where? And for what purpose? The questions piled up, each one more terrifying than the last. My parents were part of this, that much was clear. But they weren't alone. This was bigger than them, bigger than anything I could have imagined. I needed help. Pulling out my phone, I hesitated before dialing Rachel's number. I didn't know if I could trust her, if telling her would put her in danger, but I didn't have a choice. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Jack. Where are you? What's going on?" Her voice was a lifeline, grounding me in a reality that felt like it was slipping away. "I can't explain everything right now," I said, my voice trembling. "But I need you to meet me. I think Alex is alive, and I think my parents." A sudden noise made me freeze. The soft jingle of the diner's bell as the door opened. I turned slowly, my blood turning to ice. It was my father. He stood in the entrance, scanning the diner with a calm that was more unsettling than any outburst. When his eyes locked on mine, he smiled, a cold, calculated smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll call you back," I whispered to Rachel, hanging up before she could respond. My father walked toward me, his hands in his pockets, his movements casual, as if he were simply here for a cup of coffee. "Jack," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You've been busy." I didn't respond. My hand slid beneath the table, clutching the pocket knife I'd managed to retrieve from my bag. He noticed. "There's no need for that," he said, his tone almost paternal. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to talk." "Talk?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've been lying to me my whole life. You're monsters." He sighed, leaning back in the booth. "It's not as simple as you think. What you've stumbled onto, it's complicated. You don't understand the bigger picture." "Then explain it," I demanded, my grip on the knife tightening. He hesitated, as if considering how much to reveal. "There are things in this world, Jack, that you can't comprehend. Things that need to be done to maintain balance. What your mother and I do, it's necessary." "Necessary?" My voice cracked. "You're killing people. Alex, he's alive, isn't he? Where is he?" My father's expression darkened. "You shouldn't have gone to the barn. You shouldn't have taken those papers. You've put yourself in danger." "From who?" "From you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "From them. The people we work for. You think you've uncovered something big, but you don't know the half of it. They're watching you now, Jack. Every move you make." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around the diner, suddenly hyper-aware of every patron, every pair of eyes that might be observing me. "I don't believe you," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He reached into his pocket, and I tensed, ready to defend myself. But all he pulled out was a small, black USB drive. "Take this," he said, sliding it across the table. "It's everything you need to know. But be warned, once you open it, there's no going back. They'll know you have it." I stared at the drive, my mind racing. This could be a trap, another layer of manipulation. But what choice did I have? "I don't trust you," I said. He smiled again, that same chilling smile. "Good. You shouldn't." Without another word, he stood and walked out of the diner, leaving me alone with the USB drive and a head full of questions. I didn't follow him. Instead, I slipped the drive into my bag, paid my bill, and left the diner through the back door. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was certain, I wasn't going home. The USB drive weighed heavily in my pocket as I trudged along the desolate highway, the faint hum of streetlights my only companion. My father's words echoed in my mind, "Once you open it, there's no going back." He wasn't trying to scare me. I could tell he was deadly serious. But even as fear twisted my gut, a stronger force compelled me forward, the need to know. The need to expose the truth, to understand the darkness that had swallowed my family, Alex, and now me. I glanced over my shoulder every few minutes, convinced that someone was following. Paranoia gnawed at the edges of my sanity, but I couldn't dismiss it as irrational. My father had warned me, and if they were watching, I had to stay ahead of them. As I walked, the road opened up to a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, flickering neon signs and paint peeling from the walls, but it offered a roof and relative anonymity. I stepped inside, the musty air and dim lighting pressing in on me like a suffocating blanket. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Room?" "Yes." "Just for the night," I said, sliding cash across the counter. I didn't dare use a card, any digital trail was a risk. He handed me a key, mumbling something about checkout times, but I was already heading down the hall to my room. The lock clicked shut behind me, and for the first time since the diner, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. The room was a dingy box with faded wallpaper and a single dim lamp, but it was quiet. Safe, for now. I sat on the bed, the USB drive burning a hole in my palm. I didn't have my laptop, it was still at home, but my phone had an adapter. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I hesitated, staring at the tiny device as if it might bite me. Was I ready for this? The knock on the door startled me so badly that I nearly dropped the drive. My heart raced as I stood, clutching the pocket knife from my bag. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to steady my voice. No answer. The silence was worse than any response could have been. I crept toward the door, the knife trembling in my hand. Pressing my eye to the peephole, I scanned the narrow corridor. Empty. I opened the door a crack, just enough to peek outside. No one. The hall was deserted. But there was something on the floor, a folded piece of paper. I snatched it up and closed the door, bolting it behind me. Unfolding the note, I read the 3 words scrawled in jagged handwriting, "We are watching." My breath hitched. They knew I was here. I grabbed my bag, stuffing the USB drive and what little I'd brought with me inside. I couldn't stay. If they found me this quickly, the motel was compromised. Slipping out the back entrance, I disappeared into the night. The next town wasn't far, about a mile down the road, but I stayed off the highway, weaving through fields and wooded patches to avoid being spotted. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch set my nerves on edge. When I finally emerged on the outskirts of town, the exhaustion hit me like a wave. I needed somewhere to sit, to think. A 24-hour laundromat beckoned with its fluorescent lights and the promise of relative anonymity. Inside, the hum of machines drowned out the sound of my own racing thoughts. I settled into a corner with my phone and the USB drive, glancing around to ensure I wasn't being watched. Plugging in the drive, I held my breath as the files loaded. At first, there was nothing but a single folder labeled Veritas. Latin for truth. My fingers hovered over the screen, dread and curiosity battling for control. With a deep breath, I opened the folder. The first file was a text document. Project Veritas, Operational Nodes. The document detailed a network of locations, houses, businesses, and seemingly abandoned sites, used as fronts for an underground operation. Each node was connected to a larger network, the purpose of which wasn't immediately clear. My house was listed as one of the nodes. The second file was worse. It was a series of emails between my father and someone called the architect. The messages were vague, but the language was clinical and chilling. Target acquisition complete. Awaiting delivery protocol. Node compromised. Relocate operational assets. One email, dated just days ago, caught my attention. The boy knows too much. Eliminate the loose end. My stomach churned. They were talking about me. I scrolled further, uncovering files filled with surveillance photos, financial records, and victim profiles. Each victim was marked with a status: processed, pending, eliminated. Alex's name was in the pending category. My hands trembled as I clicked on the final file. It was a video. The screen went black for a moment before flickering to life. The video was grainy, the lighting poor, but I recognized the setting immediately: the basement from the barn. Alex was there, tied to the same chair, his head hanging low. He was alive, but barely. Two figures entered the frame: my parents. My mother held a clipboard, speaking in a voice devoid of emotion. Subject 17 is uncooperative, she said, glancing at Alex as if he were nothing more than an object. Recommendation: transfer to Site B for processing. My father nodded. We'll handle the transfer tomorrow. Ensure the boy doesn't interfere. The camera panned to a table where my name was scrawled across a manila folder. My school photo was clipped to the front. I slammed the phone down, bile rising in my throat. They had planned everything. They had anticipated my every move. A sudden noise jolted me from my thoughts: a car pulling into the laundromat parking lot. The headlights illuminated the windows, casting long shadows inside. I stuffed the phone and USB drive into my bag, slipping out the back before whoever it was could come inside. I needed to act fast. Alex didn't have much time, and neither did I. The files on the USB drive had mentioned Site B. If I could find it, I might be able to stop whatever they were planning. But the deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't just about Alex. This was bigger than him, bigger than me. And the web I was caught in was far darker than I'd ever imagined. The files on the USB had given me one lead: Site B. It wasn't much, just a vague reference buried in a sea of cryptic documents. No address, no detailed description, just a string of coordinates hidden in a spreadsheet of transport logs. When I plugged the numbers into a map app, they pointed to a remote location deep in the woods, miles away from any town or road. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find a forgotten bunker or a secret government lab. The kind of place you'd never stumble upon by accident. I knew going there was reckless. I didn't have a plan, no backup, no weapons beyond the pocket knife I'd been clutching like a talisman. But I also knew I didn't have a choice. Alex's life depended on it, and if I hesitated, it might already be too late. I spent the night planning my approach, poring over the files on the USB in search of anything that could help. Most of the information was encrypted or fragmented, but a few more details emerged about Site B. It was labeled as a processing facility, a term that sent chills down my spine. Other files suggested it was heavily monitored, with surveillance systems and armed guards. This wasn't just some basement operation. It was a fortress. By morning, I'd pieced together a rough timeline. The video from the USB had been uploaded 2 days ago, meaning Alex was likely still alive, but for how long, I couldn't say. I borrowed a bike from a nearby gas station, paying the attendant with what little cash I had left. The coordinates were over 10 miles away, but the bike made the journey faster and quieter than walking. The trail to Site B was almost impossible to spot, hidden behind a tangle of trees and underbrush. I left the bike behind, slipping into the woods with nothing but my bag and my nerves. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound my shallow breaths and the crunch of leaves underfoot. After nearly an hour of hiking, I saw it, a clearing where the trees gave way to a massive, squat building made of concrete and steel. It was surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire, and I could make out cameras mounted on poles, their lenses scanning the perimeter. I ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding. The place looked like a cross between a prison and a warehouse, with no windows and only one visible entrance, a reinforced steel door guarded by two men in black uniforms. I watched them for a while, trying to figure out their routine. They seemed alert, their hands resting on holstered weapons, but they rarely moved from their posts. Circling the perimeter, I found a weak spot in the fence where the ground had eroded beneath it, creating a small gap. It wasn't much, but it was big enough for me to crawl through. I waited until the guards were distracted. One of them had lit a cigarette, and the other was scrolling through his phone, before making my move. The gap was tight, the jagged wire tearing at my jacket, but I managed to squeeze through without making too much noise. Once inside the fence, I kept low, darting from shadow to shadow as I made my way toward the building. The back of the structure had a service entrance, a smaller door with an electronic keypad. I pulled out the USB drive, hoping it might contain a code or override key for the lock, but no such luck. I'd have to find another way in. That's when I noticed the vent. It was small, barely wide enough to crawl through, but it was unguarded. The cover was held in place by rusted screws, and with enough effort, I was able to pry it loose. The metallic screech of the screws echoed in the stillness, and I froze, listening for any sign of an alarm. Nothing. I climbed into the vent, the metal walls cold against my skin. The passage was narrow and claustrophobic, but it led me deeper into the building, past the reinforced walls and cameras. The first thing I noticed when I emerged was the smell, a sickly mix of bleach, blood, and decay. The air was thick, oppressive, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I pressed on, moving through dimly lit corridors lined with heavy steel doors. Each door had a small, reinforced window, and through them, I caught glimpses of what lay inside: people. Men, women, even children. All of them bound to chairs or strapped to tables, their faces pale and gaunt. Some were unconscious, their heads lolling to the side, while others stared blankly ahead, their eyes filled with a hopelessness that made my stomach churn. I forced myself to keep moving, my steps light and deliberate. The place was a maze, with intersecting hallways and identical doors that made it impossible to tell where I was. Then I heard it, muffled voices coming from a room at the end of the hall. I crept closer, pressing myself against the wall as I peeked through the open door. Inside was a lab of sorts, with rows of monitors and equipment I didn't recognize. My mother stood at the center of the room, her clipboard in hand, speaking to a man I didn't recognize, a tall, broad figure in a tailored suit. "The transfer is scheduled for tomorrow," my mother said, her voice calm and businesslike. "Subject 17 will be processed before then." "And the boy?" the man asked, still unaccounted for. She replied, a hint of frustration in her tone. "But we're monitoring his movements. He won't get far." I clenched my fists, anger bubbling beneath my fear. They were talking about me. The man nodded, turning to one of the monitors. "Ensure everything is in place. We can't afford any mistakes." My mother gave a curt nod before leaving the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall. When the room was empty, I slipped inside, my eyes scanning the monitors for any sign of Alex. Most of the screens displayed live feeds of the facility, but one caught my attention. It showed a cell, smaller than the others, where Alex was slumped in a corner, his hands bound and his face bruised. He was alive, but barely. My chest tightened. I had to get to him. I searched the room for anything that could help, eventually finding a keycard on a desk near the monitors. It wasn't labeled, but it was my best shot. Slipping it into my pocket, I left the room and retraced my steps, following the map on one of the monitors to Alex's cell. When I reached the door, my hands shook as I slid the keycard through the reader. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside. Alex looked up, his eyes widening with a mix of relief and disbelief. "Jack," he croaked, his voice barely audible. "We're getting out of here," I said, kneeling to untie him. But even as I worked, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because escaping Site B wouldn't just mean running from my parents. It meant going head-to-head with the shadowy organization they were a part of, a web far darker and more sinister than I'd ever imagined. The door to Alex's cell swung shut behind us with a quiet click, and for a moment, there was only silence. I helped him to his feet, his weight heavy against my shoulder. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises, his breathing shallow. Whatever they'd done to him, he was barely holding on. "We have to move fast," I whispered, scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. Alex nodded weakly, but his grip on my arm told me he understood. Navigating the maze of hallways was harder with Alex leaning on me, but I forced myself to stay focused. The keycard was my lifeline, granting us access to doors that might otherwise have been impassable. I avoided the larger corridors, sticking to the shadows and listening for the faint hum of voices or the distant clatter of boots on concrete. But my luck couldn't last forever. As we approached a set of steel stairs leading upward, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor ahead. I froze, pulling Alex behind me as I peered around the corner. 2 guards, armed and alert, were making their way toward us. I didn't have time to think. I spotted an open maintenance closet nearby and shoved Alex inside, closing the door just as the guards rounded the corner. Through the slats of the door, I could see them pause, their eyes scanning the hallway. My heart thundered in my chest, every muscle in my body tense as I waited for them to move on. But one of them stopped, his gaze lingering on the floor. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to a faint smear of blood leading to the closet. "Alex." He must have been bleeding more than I realized. They approached the door, their hands on their holsters. I gripped the only weapon I had, a wrench I'd grabbed from the desk in the lab, and braced myself. The first guard opened the door, and before he could react, I swung the wrench with all my strength. It connected with a sickening crack, and he went down. The second guard lunged at me, his hand grabbing my wrist. We struggled, the wrench slipping from my grip as he shoved me against the wall. His fist connected with my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. But Alex, weak as he was, managed to grab the wrench. With a desperate cry, he swung it at the guard's head. The man crumpled to the floor, unconscious. For a moment, neither of us moved, both of us gasping for breath. "Let's go," Alex rasped, his voice strained. We made it to the stairs, climbing upward as fast as we could. I didn't know where they led, but anywhere was better than the basement. At the top, we found ourselves in a large warehouse-like room filled with crates and equipment. This was different from the sterile, clinical feel of the lower levels. The air was cold and smelled of oil and metal. And then I saw it, the exit. A massive steel door, half open, with daylight spilling in around its edges. "We're almost there," I said, half carrying Alex toward it. But before we could reach it, an alarm blared, the sound deafening in the open space. Red lights began to flash, and the sound of boots echoed from every direction. They knew we were here. I looked around desperately, my mind racing. There was no way we could fight our way out, not with Alex in this state. And then I saw it, a forklift parked near a stack of crates. "Hold on," I told Alex, propping him against a crate. "Stay hidden. I'll get us out of here." I sprinted to the forklift, my fingers fumbling as I started the engine. It roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, driving it straight toward the crate stacked near the exit. The sound drew the guards' attention, and they opened fire. Bullets pinged off the metal frame of the forklift, but I didn't stop. I aimed for the crates, ramming into them with all the force I could muster. The stack toppled, crashing into the guards and blocking the path to the exit. "Now!" I yelled, running back to Alex. I threw his arm over my shoulder, dragging him toward the door as the guards shouted and scrambled to climb over the debris. We stumbled out into the daylight, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. The forest stretched out before us, a sea of green that offered a glimmer of hope, but the sound of pursuit was close behind. We ran, adrenaline propelling us forward even as exhaustion threatened to pull us down. The forest was dense, the underbrush tearing at our clothes, but we didn't stop. Eventually, the sound of voices and footsteps faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. We collapsed near a stream, the cool water a welcome relief against our burning skin. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "We can't stop," Alex said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I replied, staring at the USB drive in my hand. Over the next few days, we kept moving, staying off the main roads and avoiding towns. I used the USB drive to access the files whenever I could find a secure connection, piecing together more of the puzzle. Site B wasn't the only facility. There were others, labeled Site A, Site C, and so on. Each one a cog in a machine far larger than I'd imagined. The documents hinted at experiments, human trafficking, and an organization with ties to powerful people across the globe. But one file stood out, a list of names. Alex's name was there. So was mine. My parents weren't just participants in this nightmare. They were orchestrators. And their reach was far greater than I'd feared. I looked at Alex, his face still pale but his eyes resolute. "We can't hide forever," he said. "We have to stop this." He was right. Running wasn't enough. Somewhere out there, people were still being taken, still being hurt. And I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to stop it. "We'll need help," I said. "Then we find it," Alex replied.